The command came sharp and cruel, echoing over the highway as gravel dug into her knees. A routine traffic stop had turned into something far darker in seconds. Sirens screamed. A taser crackled in the air. And Alexia Ward realized this was no longer about the law, it was about survival. Witnesses froze. Phones shook in trembling hands. Then, in a moment no one expected, the balance of power shifted violently. What happened next would leave officers stunned, bystanders silent, and an entire department exposed. But how did one traffic stop become a moment that changed everything? Comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And subscribe for more powerful stories that demand to be heard. Before flashing lights and raised voices shattered the calm, Alexia Ward's life moved with quiet intention. She was not reckless, loud, or searching for trouble. Her days were built around discipline and restraint, shaped by years of carrying responsibility without complaint. Alexia believed in keeping her head down, doing what was right, and getting home safely. For her, survival often meant blending in. That afternoon had started peacefully. She had just left her mother, Sarah Ward, whose modest home was one of the few places where Alexia allowed herself to fully relax. Their visit was simple. Shared food, familiar conversation, a brief escape from the weight of the outside world. Sarah watched her daughter leave with the same concern she always carried, reminding her to drive safely, reminding her to call when she got home. The road stretched ahead, long and familiar. Tall trees lined the highway, sunlight cutting through them in slow, rhythmic flashes. Alexia drove steadily, her thoughts quiet, focused on nothing more than the drive itself. It felt ordinary, predictable, the kind of moment people take for granted. Alexia had learned over time how careful she needed to be. She knew how quickly ordinary situations could turn dangerous for someone who looked like her. She followed the rules closely, not because she believed they always protected her, but because she knew even small missteps could be used against her. Calm, controlled, invisible, that was how she moved through the world. Still, a subtle unease settled in her chest as the minutes passed. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind that came from experience rather than imagination. She adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, steady and relaxed, refusing to let tension show. She didn't know yet how quickly normalcy could collapse. She didn't know that this quiet stretch of road would soon become unforgettable. All she knew was that something felt off, like the calm before a sudden storm. And in moments, without warning, the drive she thought would end at home would instead mark the beginning of something far bigger, something she would never be able to outrun. The flashing lights appeared suddenly, flooding Alexia Ward's mirrors with red and blue. She slowed immediately, signaling before easing onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath her tires as she brought the car to a stop. Her heart rate stayed controlled, but her awareness sharpened. She had done nothing wrong. Still, she knew better than to assume that would matter. A voice cracked through a loudspeaker, firm and impatient, ordering her to keep her hands visible. Alexia complied without hesitation, placing them carefully on the steering wheel. She kept her movements deliberate, her posture non-threatening. The air felt heavier with each passing second. Footsteps approached, one set from the driver's side, another circling behind the vehicle. Alexia could feel their presence before she saw them. Officer Dawson stopped near her window, his stance aggressive, eyes scanning her car with open suspicion. Officer Riker lingered behind, positioned in a way that made retreat impossible. The question came sharp and accusatory, not curious. "Where are you coming from? Whose car is this?" The tone carried an assumption that had nothing to do with traffic laws. Alexia answered calmly, her voice steady, explaining that the vehicle belonged to her. Her response was met with disbelief, then contempt. Dawson ordered her out of the car. She paused only long enough to follow instructions exactly as given. The door was pulled open before she could fully comply. The sudden force knocked her balance off, boots scraping against gravel as she stepped out. Traffic slowed along the highway. A few drivers stared, others kept moving, unwilling to see. Alexia was told to turn around, to spread her feet, to place her hands against the vehicle. She did as instructed, metal warm beneath her palms. The search that followed was rough and unnecessary. Hands pressed harder than required, lingering too long, asserting dominance rather than procedure. Each moment chipped away at her dignity. "I'm not resisting," she said, carefully. Riker laughed under his breath. Pain shot through her shoulder as an arm was twisted behind her back, raised higher than it should have been. Alexia clenched her jaw but stayed silent, refusing to give them the reaction they seemed eager for. She could feel eyes on her now, drivers recording, witnesses frozen in place. Another officer stepped closer. The sound of a taser being drawn was unmistakable. The crackle of electricity filled the space between them, sharp and threatening. Alexia felt the device press against her neck, cold and final. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice low but clear. Dawson responded with a smile that carried no humor. In that moment, Alexia understood something with brutal clarity. Compliance had not protected her. Silence had not slowed them down. This stop had escalated because they wanted it to. The power imbalance wasn't accidental, it was the point. Time seemed to stretch as the taser hummed to life. Alexia's mind shifted instantly, not into panic but into calculation. She noted distances, positions, weight distribution. One officer directly behind her, one slightly to the side, another approaching fast, emboldened by the moment. When the first move came, it happened faster than anyone expected. Alexia reacted with precision, not rage. Her movements were controlled, efficient, born from instinct rather than emotion. The sudden resistance shattered the officer's confidence. Commands turned into shouts. The scene erupted into chaos. Dawson stumbled back, stunned. Riker rushed forward, misjudging both speed and intent. In seconds, the balance of power shifted violently. What had been a controlled display of authority spiraled into confusion as Alexia remained upright, focused, and terrifyingly calm. Sirens wailed in the distance as backup units raced toward the scene. By the time Lieutenant Briggs arrived, the situation was already far beyond what any of them could explain away. And standing at the center of it all, breathing steady amid the chaos, Alexia knew this moment could never be undone. This was no longer just about what had happened on the road. It was about what would happen next, and who would be exposed when the truth came out. The highway no longer felt like a road. It felt like a trap. Red and blue lights flooded the scene as more cruisers screeched to a halt, boxing everything in. Sirens overlapped, disorienting and loud, pulling attention from every direction. Officers shouted over one another, their voices sharp with anger and fear. The crowd on the roadside grew thicker. Phones were raised higher now, recording every second. Alexia Ward stood at the center of it all, her breathing controlled despite the chaos around her. Dust clung to her clothes, her muscles burned. She knew the moment had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Lieutenant Briggs stormed forward, fury written across his face as he took in the scene. Injured officers, shaken witnesses. A situation spiraling out of control. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. His eyes locked onto Alexia, and in them was a decision already made. Weapons were raised. Briggs shouted orders meant to reassert authority, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. This wasn't command anymore, it was desperation. Alexia could feel the danger closing in from all sides. One wrong move now wouldn't just be punished. It would be erased, rewritten, justified later. She raised her hands slowly, visibly, making it clear she wasn't attacking. But calm no longer mattered. Reason had already left the scene. An officer lunged forward. Another followed. The space collapsed instantly. Alexia reacted on instinct, driven by the same truth that had guided her moments earlier. This was survival. Movements were fast, precise. The chaos blurred into flashes of motion and sound. A body fell hard. A weapon hit the ground. Someone screamed for backup that was already there. And then it happened. In a split second that witnesses would replay over and over, the confrontation reached its breaking point. An officer charged without hesitation, force overwhelming restraint. Alexia moved to protect herself. When the motion stopped, silence crashed down just as suddenly. One officer lay motionless. The world seemed to pause. Sirens faded into the background. Voices dropped. Phones trembled in shaking hands as the reality of what had happened settled over the crowd. Officers froze, unsure of their next move. No one rushed forward. No one spoke. Alexia stood there, stunned by the weight of the moment. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't wanted this. But she understood with painful clarity that there was no turning back now. Whatever story would be told next had already begun writing itself. Briggs stared at the scene in disbelief, his authority shattered in front of cameras and witnesses. This wasn't a narrative he could control. Not anymore. As more sirens approached and flashing lights filled the highway, Alexia realized this was no longer just about her survival. It was about accountability. And the truth, captured, witnessed, undeniable, was finally too loud to bury. The road was eventually cleared, but nothing about that night truly ended when the lights faded. Alexia Ward was taken away under watchful eyes, surrounded by flashing cameras and whispered judgments. By morning, headlines had already chosen their language, shaping narratives before facts had a chance to surface. What had happened on that stretch of highway was being debated, dissected, and distorted, but it could not be erased. Witness footage spread faster than official statements. Questions followed. Investigations began. What was meant to be a quiet traffic stop unraveled into something far larger, forcing a reckoning that extended beyond one woman, one officer, or one department. The incident pulled back a curtain many had tried to keep closed. For Alexia, the aftermath was heavy. The weight of survival came with consequences, scrutiny, isolation, and the knowledge that her life would never return to what it had been hours earlier. Yet alongside the fear and uncertainty came something unexpected: visibility. People who had once looked away were now watching, listening, asking why situations like this kept happening and who paid the price when power went unchecked. Communities spoke up. Advocates demanded accountability. Names that once carried authority were suddenly questioned under public light. The story wasn't just about one confrontation anymore. It had become a mirror reflecting a pattern too familiar to ignore. This moment forced an uncomfortable truth into the open. That compliance does not always equal safety, that dignity is too often treated as a privilege, and that racial injustice doesn't begin with resistance. It begins with assumption. Alexia's experience echoed countless others who never made headlines, whose stories ended quietly and without justice. What happened on that highway asked something of everyone watching. Not sympathy, but awareness. Not outrage alone, but responsibility. Because if this could happen in broad daylight on camera in front of witnesses, how many moments like it go unseen? How many stories are still waiting to be told? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen. And don't forget to hit the like button. Your support helps these stories reach the people who need them most.